Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the March 26, 2019 meeting. It's an informal work session of the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners, and this time our work session is reserved for topics of discussion scheduled for the commission in advance. If a work session is not needed, the balance of the meeting will begin at 1:30. The first thing was a child abuse prevention presentation. I believe we're going to hold that off until next Thursday under whole business, and then we will have a reading of that. Mark will probably be here on Thursday, do you think?
That'd be new business?
New business. We'll, once we get down to the agenda, there was a proclamation that was submitted that I missed. So we'll get that added to the packet and added to the agenda for Thursday. And then I saw that he was planning to attend on Thursday, not today.
The second thing, we did have a work session scheduled with SEDCOR and Abishai to review the quarterly update, the grant review subcommittee, and you have you heard anything from Abishai?
She's right here.
Oh, when did you come? When did you come in?
I'm sneaky.
Was he joking?
We know you're sneaky. I was paying too much credit. So Abishai, come on forward, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Hi.
Hello.
I snuck in. I know Commissioner Sterrett saw me sneak in. I'm well, thank you.
She sees everybody sneak in.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot better now that the flu is out from my home. So I guess we'll start by just reviewing the quarterly report for this last year. I submitted to each of you more of kind of a narrative understanding of what we've been doing throughout the year. I know that you might not have had time to read that entirely because of my time of submission. Again, thank you for allowing me to be a little late on that. The flu hit us pretty hard this last couple of weeks. But just to hit some of the highlights, so looking at the templated form where we're normally giving our updates from, I wanted to highlight that this quarter I performed 25 company visits, bringing that to a total of 128 for the year. We have seen a few jobs be created, some smaller organizations as well as a larger expansion in Sheridan that I've already shared with you. And we have a couple of active projects going on in the county, and then a few potential projects that we're working on, working with some site locators for a few opportunities, especially those that have rail service throughout the county. So those are pretty exciting land opportunities. I wanted to dive in after that. I kind of deferred to this larger narrative portion, and I wanted to dive into that a little bit and highlight some things that we've been discussing. So one of the things that you've asked me to provide is a better understanding of the sort of work that SEDCOR is doing in the county, both in relation to businesses and traded sector industries, and then in relation to working directly with the cities to create economic capacity going forward. I highlighted a little bit of that work under the business retention and expansion, and then it's kind of peppered throughout. One of the things I wanted to highlight is that we've been continuing to work with our processors and within various different industries to overcome some hurdles that they're currently facing around water issues. So as you know, the water reallocation that's going on in the Willamette Valley Basin is a highlighted concern, one that we highlighted and spoke on at our Ag Breakfast, and we'll be following up with our next Ag Breakfast that had to be rescheduled due to weather. But we're making sure that that's a topic of conversation we're staying very informed about and making sure that our industry partners are informed on. Another issue is around wastewater regulation. DEQ has changed some of their requirements for wastewater regulation, and you know, as always, regulation is imparted for good reason, and sometimes we have to work through how to make sure that that can satisfactorily be deployed throughout the industry while also you know, being something that's manageable for industry. So there's a lot of work to be done on that currently, not just in Yamhill County, but in the region. So we are currently acting as convener for those conversations, and I think it's something for us all to be watching going forward. It's pretty significant stuff. Let's see, just a few other highlights. I did add in a few testimonials from some businesses that we worked with, so you have a chance to hear directly from them about the sort of work that we're doing. And then I go on to talk about process development. This next portion where I'm doing the presentation on sharing with you our work and recommendations for the grants and for the grant review committee is a part of that process sort of work. But I wanted to give you that update also on our CRM system. I know that that's been an exciting conversation, at least for us, and hopefully you've been excited as you hear us talk about it. It is a system that's going to help us to centrally locate some regional data around economic development, and it will help us to manage our lands inventory a little bit better. It will also assist us with, I believe, some more functional reporting. And it is a big project for us. It's an entirely new system, and so we're trying to understand how to build it properly and then how to get out of it what we're looking for. And we hit a little bit of a delay when we went through our transition with our president of our organization. So I just wanted you to know that that is still very important work that we're doing, and I think in the next few months you'll be able to see some results of that work. So again, keeping it in front of you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Abisha, when you talk about the data, because I know this has always been something we've discussed, how intertwined is this going to be with the state's, what is it called, Rockstar? What are those state databases that inventory industrial variety of different parcels that are available?
That's a great question. So the state program that we currently use is called Prospector, and we just had a working session with Daniel Holenbrook, who works for Business Oregon, who's been given the responsibility of managing that system going forward, and it has had some challenges. And he is working to kind of beef up the system, make it a little bit more usable, a little more user-friendly for our partners who have to update that information. So that's usually our commercial and industrial real estate brokers that are updating the real estate information into that system. And then when a request at a statewide level comes in for a site locator, SEDCOR then creates the RFP for those site locators utilizing that data. So obviously, if data isn't built into that system, whether it be through our partners or our own efforts, then it's not there to retrieve. And I think historically, the system has presented enough challenges that it has lost some of its users, just haven't trusted its functionality. And I think we see that that's really true in Yamhill County. The data is just not being built in, and it's not being managed properly. And so we recognize that as being an issue, and we're working with Business Oregon as they rebuild this system to try to improve that. So our current plan for that is we've given them feedback and input on the sort of functionality we believe that it needs to include. Daniel is working to build that out, and then we will be holding a few training sessions with our local economic development practitioners in the region and our commercial and industrial real estate folks, so that we can train them on how to build it into the system, train ourselves, right? Also how to use the new system, and then start retrieving that data more accurately. So we will be continuing to use Prospector. The state just re-upped their contract for that program, so they have shown a forward-looking commitment to that system, and I believe it's a 5-year contract, 3 to 5 years. I apologize, I don't know exactly, and I can find out for you, but it's enough of a commitment that we know that that's the system that will be used to do statewide recruitments, so we need to utilize that same system. What we look to use our CRM for in terms of inventory management is the unlisted lands. And what I mean by that is that we know a lot of folks in the county that own land who would be interested potentially in selling that land or partnering for a best use, but do not want it to be listed. And sometimes those are really good conversations for us to be able to have, but we need to have a centralized database for our own use so that we can refer to those when appropriate. So we'll be using both systems, and I think that's how they'll play out.
Okay, great.
Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Good.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions on kind of the business retention expansion piece or the process development as you had a chance to look through it?
I think the process development, especially the business retention piece, was probably something that we probably could have used in Yamhill County 5-10 years ago. And it's nice to see that starting to be put in place now, because it's
Yeah.
going to actually serve us very well for both for us as a government body and also for our traded sector businesses. It's going to be very important. Mary, I appreciate the question you brought up because it's a applies to the prospector. I've been in a prospector a couple times, and it just really didn't give a full picture of what was available out there, where it was available, whether it was shovel ready, where, you know, what had to be done on it. And so I think prospector, hopefully, with working with Sedcor, that prospector will get much, much better to use and easier to use. So.
Yeah. So moving forward a little bit into that process, I did provide you a list of our current members for the Economic Development Advisory Council so that you just have an understanding of the work that we've done to try to create engagement throughout the county, focusing on our various key industry sectors for traded sector, and also, of course, focusing on just kind of regional representation at a city level. We're pretty excited to have the level of participation that we do, and we're continuing to build on that. There's still 4 to 5 other industry partners that I'm just solidifying that commitment to the process with.
I just might add on that, you know, I went to my first EDAC meeting, the Economic Development Advisory Committee, 2 weeks ago at the Senior Center. The enthusiasm, the people around the meeting, and how Abishaw led the meeting was amazing. And C-Reach, the owner of C-Reach, having actually traded sector partners and partners there, giving their own personal opinions about works or what doesn't work. It was an excellent experience, and we had great input. There was, I think, 16 there, 17 there, something like that. I can't remember.
It was 18, not including myself.
18, but it was a very good. I think those kind of sessions of the advisory committee are going to play definitely a good part in our economic development. So,
yeah.
Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good to see you.
Good to see you again. So go ahead, Abishaw.
Thank you. And one of the things that we focus on at the EDAC meeting is the first portion of each meeting is education. So we strive to educate ourselves on what is going on in a specific area of focus or in the county around a specific area of focus. So for example, what we are looking forward to at the next meeting is to have Online Northwest give a presentation about rural broadband implementation. And then we're also hoping to get somebody from USDA Rural Broadband Initiatives or the statewide initiative to come and talk to us about what are the opportunities for partnering similar to the way that Online Northwest did in the city of Dayton and the city of Willamina. How do we expand on that work? How do we kind of multiply those efforts and even reach out beyond the cities into the county to make sure that we're providing everybody access? So we spend the first half talking about an educational component so that we're all becoming informed and figuring out kind of how to move the effort together, forward together. And then the second half of that is doing real work. What's kind of talking about what are we going to functionally work on together as a group, and how do we move that work forward? So we talk about education, and then we talk about action. The next section is, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of the type of marketing efforts that we've been deploying over this last year. And the Enterprise magazine is one way that we do that. We also do that through social media and a regular newsletter that we send out. We also have various other efforts, some that I talk about a little here, which is some work that we're currently doing to work with each individual community to develop marketing pieces that highlight local assets, exhibit regional economic data, and provide business resource information. We're also partnering with the county. Carrie Martin is our current contact for this work, but we're partnering to improve and continue to support ongoing the Grow Yamhill website. So kind of making sure that that really is a place for information for folks to go to, and that it's being utilized the way that it's being used and utilized the way that it had intended to be, and that we're providing support to help make that happen. So I'm sure we'll be asking for a little bit of input as we go forward as to what you'd like to see included in that as well. And we're just kind of kicking off that conversation, but I'm really excited to see that happen and to be utilizing that resource a little bit more. Were there any questions about marketing?
I have one quick question.
Sure.
The magazine, the Enterprise magazine, that seems like it would be a fairly expensive proposition. And I'm just wondering, where is that magazine going?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something we have been talking about. Did you want to jump in on that one, Eric?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if that's on, but I keep leaning.
Yeah. It is an expensive proposition. It's something that's been kind of its own kind of cost center, and we do outsource the production of that and the advertising to that to a third party that puts that together and does a lot of that work for us. I think we're looking at just me being relatively new still. I think I can still claim that to a degree. Given when I hit about the 6-month level, I think over the summer we have some personnel changes we're looking at, and I think it's going to give us a chance to kind of look at our whole marketing, what we've been doing all along, because I think that's really how we operate these days. But with enterprise specifically, one thing I noticed lately is that I'm very pleased to see it in banks, when I go into locations, I see it sitting there with other business journals and someone who notices that kind of thing. It's like I'd like to see it, that kind of outreach for SEDCOR with our financial partners and with other businesses. We do one a quarter. I think we're looking at maybe cutting that down to 3, and because it is a lot of work. And the one question I had has been, how do we, if it is a money-making proposition for us, but it takes some of our staff almost, becomes a full-time job almost to get that, put together from our perspective. Maybe it's not the money-maker we think it is. So I think it's certainly a helpful opportunity for us. It's a good way to connect with a larger audience, I think, in the region. We are doing, we're getting more of those multiple copies out to the chambers of commerce. That's one thing we've talked about. We've been kind of sending one copy, to all of our chambers, but, start sending multiple copies so they have those on hand for people to take a look at as well. Maybe we would look at combining the summer, summer edition, which is a little slower time of the year as far as our kinds of activities go. Maybe combine that with our annual report and have a kind of a different thing that we would look at in the summer and the SEDCOR annual report, and then winter, fall, and spring have our own, have our kind of more usual type of publications. We're going to be meeting with the Mount Angel publishers on Thursday to kind of do a check-in with them. So we do have an opportunity to look at it. Would love suggestions if you have some. We're always trying to improve our mix of marketing and communication.
Thank you.
I can say, the Enterprise, and I read the Enterprise front to back, and I've been really impressed lately with the quality of the private sector advertisers that advertise in there. There's private sector companies that I never even had the faintest clue about. What I found is missing, though, is whether it be Marion County or Polk County or Yamhill County. SEDCOR tells a real good job, but there's nothing really in there other than an article sometime where the different counties, and I talked to Commissioner Pope about this, where the individual counties do advertising to sell the individual counties on the work, live, play, grow opportunities. But I know it's a lot of work, and Eric, I totally agree with being able to combine functions like that. But now that more of them are going out, it's certainly a publication I would like to see go away, because I do think it's very valuable, especially the more people we can reach with it. So
when I look at other similar organizations and the type of magazines they put out, and quite often it's we do a newsletter and we do other things, but it really is, kind of a proper magazine. So when I came on and looked at it, I was like, well, it really is nice. And for us, I think it allows us kind of from editorially to start talking about, okay, how do we predict, what's going to be happening and make it topical? So if it's, water issues, for example, we know that there's water issues going on. We can try to tie that into our ag breakfast and tie it into enterprise. We're looking at doing an edition on the wine industry, which we know we've done a lot in the past, but this would be more geared towards innovations in wine and beverage and food processing, something, just trying to put some different spins, maybe go a little deeper in different areas. But I think we just have to keep trying to tie it into everything else so we get kind of some economies of scale out of the effort.
Thank you.
okay, thank you. Abijah, go ahead.
Sure. So the last area of focus that we really dug into was the events section, which we look at as education, information, and networking opportunities for our industry and other partners. So we shared with you just a list, and I say a short list because there's so much activity that we do in convening people, and so that Sometimes there's a line between events and meetings that gets blurred depending on how much food is there, I think. But we really just wanted to give you a sense of the work that we're doing to provide opportunities for folks, again, to have access to true education at times, to industry information, and then really also to create networking opportunities. And a good example of that networking opportunity, I think there's two kind of polarizing examples that I'd like to share. One of them would be the Opportunity Zone event that we recently hosted in the city of Newburgh. And that was intended to bring to the table folks who are investors, folks who are project-minded, folks who own property, and folks who are looking to manage funds, to give them a chance, again, to become a little bit jointly informed about some new rules that have been issued, and then to have a chance to truly just start talking to each other about what opportunities might be available and how they might be able to partner and work together with each other on those types of projects in the region. So that's one type of kind of networking opportunity. Another networking opportunity that's kind of, again, polarizing, is a little different, is the example of our golf tournament. So I have participated in many different golf tournaments throughout the region, and prior to working for SEDCOR, I was a member of SEDCOR, and those B2B event opportunities were really important to me. And more of that kind of having a chance to get to know each other on a more intimate level through something like a golf tournament brings a lot of value, and frankly, it brings a very high attendance. So we tend to be sold out across the board on our golf tournament weeks before it's ever hosted, because people really value the opportunity to just be around each other in kind of that socializing environment. So we really do attract a lot of business member participants, and the amount of business that happens out on the golf course amazes me every year. And sometimes that business is literally just meeting each other, right? Just talking to somebody who's your industry neighbor and you just haven't met them yet. So we provided that list, and also talked about a few things that are on the horizon, things that we're planning on doing. Again, mentioning the DEQ industry partner roundtable sort of conversation, and a few other things coming up. I also highlighted for you the fact that we are, of course, deeply engaged in the partnerships we currently have, and in continuing to develop partnerships in Yamhill County. MEDP, for example, went through a pretty large transition, similar to the one that brought us our friend Eric here. And we were a part of that, supporting them as they went through that transition in terms of managing some of their projects, and just kind of helping to check in on their industry partners and some of those softer things. Again, some big things like managing projects and being part of the selection committee for their new executive director. That's the title. I wanted to say president, but I knew that was wrong. So their new executive director. So any other questions or anything maybe I missed to include on that?
I'm following along, so
okay.
I don't think you missed anything.
If I did, you might not know, right?
That's right.
So I'd love to, even if not today, at another time, get your feedback on whether annually or semi-annually a more expanded report such as this has benefit, or what other components you would like me to include going forward.
Well, I think, Abishad, this kind of meeting right here in this kind of setting is very, very informative, especially the updates talking about today, like everything that SEDCOR's get involved with, what they've done for the county and everything. I think that's very important. I'm really anxious to see what's going to happen on the subcommittee with the grant subcommittee, to see how we do that, because I think the commission will have, once we see that and weigh in it, there are some changes the commission might want to make, changes they might not want to make, but I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of work that we can really do, and I've been very happy so far with what you and what SEDCOR and Carrie and everything and Ken have done on that that project. I think it's going to serve the county very, very well.
Thank you.
And I did want to mention, it was Commissioner Starrett last time I came, there was some question about kind of the business startup entrepreneurial activity, and I had mentioned what we were doing with the venture catalyst position with Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, and we had pegged that position to have been starting right about now. We've gone through a pretty robust process and narrowed it down to some candidates and some good people, but we just didn't quite feel we had the kind of, everybody says we're looking for a unicorn, you know, does the perfect candidate exist? But I think one of the things we really felt strongly about is we find somebody who has a, as I kept putting it, the secret sauce is the real instinctive sort of interest in a business and what makes them tick and what the opportunities are, and you know, asking a lot of questions, being inquisitive, and you know, the networking and you know, knowing what resources are out there. I think that's pretty easy to learn, but having some business experience and having that just kind of personality that can, you know, dig into what an entrepreneur needs and what they're looking for, it was a key. So we've just gone through another process of opening it up again and kind of looking at the job description and really recognizing, I feel a lot more comfortable now recognizing where the job description, you know, where we need to bring that out. You know, we need to involve local bankers, we need to involve the university system. I think, you know, when we put this out originally, I just didn't have kind of the idea of where these people would be looking for, you know, for potential candidates. And we did get, I think 11 or 12 people interested the first time, but that was mostly through Oregon Entrepreneurs Network and their website. So that's, you know, one thing we're looking at. In the interim, because we wanted to get started sooner, we're actually staging some events and working with Oregon Entrepreneurs Network to actually kind of, in the spirit of the Venture Catalyst, get some things going to kind of build interest more and build activity. So one of those, I think we just decided today, is going to be in McMinnville with the Oregon OTBC, Oregon, it's the folks that run the virtual incubator program that we're doing out of Beaverton, but they do a startup 411 course or event where basically it just brings startups together and they provide speakers and interested or people with resources available, and can usually draw 25, 30 people to that. And we working with MEDP. MEDP is going to host the first one here as part of our regional launch initiative. So we're still moving forward on it. A little bit of a roadblock, but one that we can hopefully get around pretty quickly and find the right person. We've also got a startup weekend. It's called. It's out of Denver. It's a group that's done, I think, 3,000 of these around the country in the past. And Indie Commons, the co-working space in Independence, the person that runs that was aware of this from her time in Denver and has gotten them to take an interest in the Mid-Willamette Valley. So come springtime, I think it's the third week in June, we'll be having this Tech Stars weekend where, once again, we kind of bring entrepreneurs together for a very intensive opportunity for them to kind of sell their ideas to potential investors, to potential resources, to refine their elevator pitch, all that sort of thing. And once again, working on that as a region so that we're able to fulfill that need for the 3 counties that we serve. And that one in particular, we want to be sure that because it's a fairly well-known program, we want to be sure that we don't get too much attention from Portland, because we don't want to have it sort of the metro area take over, because I think there would be that kind of interest. So we have to kind of have that balance.
We've heard about metro takeover, at least.
I've heard about that too.
Maybe not the best wording.
No, it was appropriate.
It's appropriate. It was very appropriate.
It's like a theme.
Yeah. Well, it's sometimes, we get a lot of, as you all know, the 20, 30, 40 miles it takes us to get to the city seems like it's 80 miles when we ask them to come out this way sometimes. Yes. So we just want to be sure that they give us a little bit of space so we can develop our own resources for this.
One thing I do have a question on, after City Through Opportunity Zone presentation that SEDCOR did in Newburgh, which I thought was very good, it seems to me that there's still, and what I'm not so sure what action or SEDCOR is taking, but after listening to some of the investors, and some of the legal people, it seems to me there still seems to be a lot of issues around time frames, when how long you have to get the tax credits and when you have to implement them. So is SEDCOR doing anything on continuing to increase the knowledge for business owners and property owners about what the opportunity zones really are, and, you know, when you can take advantage, when you can't take advantage. Because I know two people there at the Monday's meeting were from McMinnville Industrial Promotions, and they seem to have they were doing the back, a lot of questions regarding the financing and whether they can invest into something else, you know, if they take the money and they sell a piece of property, and how that affects them. So is there any more training planned on opportunity zones?
You want me to start this and then you can
Please,
jump
yeah.
in? Okay, so, and I heard a few different questions in that question that you offered, and I think one of them is, can be answered by just reminding all of us that not all of the rules have been published yet. And the federal shutdown delayed quite a bit of that rulemaking. We were expecting to have some of that, really actually quite a bit of it coming through December, January timeframe, and it just didn't happen. So part of the reason why people still have questions is because the rules haven't been finalized. Another reason why people still have questions is that even the rules that have been published just don't have any examples behind them or precedent set. So people think they understand how it works, but when little gray areas pop up, they're just not quite sure. So I think that's why we're seeing the questions the way that they are. It's also the reason why we brought in the tax folks, the CPAs and the tax attorneys to speak at both of these, because we don't even want to try to interpret these federal regulations, and they get fairly complicated, especially the more players that are involved and the more complex a project becomes, and if somebody's taking advantage, and I mean that in a good way, the healthy way, taking advantage of multiple opportunities or incentive programs at the same time, it starts to get a little too complex, and we need to make sure we have the right folks in the room. So that's that first part. I think that's why people are still a little bit confused or questioning, is because not all the rules are published, and even where they are, there's no examples to fall back on. In terms of forward education, it's still in our forefront, and so I'll answer currently. We don't have anything specifically scheduled, but part of it is we're watching, there's other organizations that are providing educational opportunities, and so our intent is always to complement and accentuate other things that are happening, not to duplicate efforts. Right. It's kind of a waste of all of our resources. So that said, Eric might have additional things to add on this, but we're keeping it on our radar as something that we need to continue to educate ourselves and others about.
You know, one of the challenges has been there have been kind of parallel communications happening. So as we're planning something, and there's a limited number of speakers for these events. So as a matter of fact, when Abhishek was out of the office and we got contacted by somebody, and I was trying to explain to them, and said, Corey, they say, oh, and they dropped her name. So there's already been conversations there. The Council of Governments, because the Mid-Valley Council of Governments is also an economic development district, they had received a training on an outreach from Stephen Brooks, who was at our event, and they have already had on their agenda to do a follow-up with more of the economic development practitioners and Stephen to talk about getting projects and into his database that they're talking about, that the state and the different foundations are working on. The one thing I kind of left, one of the things I left that meeting with in Newburgh was how well, whether it's Doug Rux or Heather Richards, how well they know the properties in their opportunity zones, where the opportunities are. And I think that to me makes me feel a lot more comfortable that as we are identifying potential project developers, that our local partners know how to zero in on where their opportunities are. I think if we see it's got to be another word for opportunity. If we see a chance to fill a need by having an updated meeting, we certainly would try to pull folks together again. One of the things we tried to do this last time also was by bringing in Craft 3, we brought in a kind of community development financial institution that kind of talked about why they don't do opportunity zone, and how they work with them as a financer. So if we can bring kind of each time something new to the table, so that we understand where kind of the variety of tools are for these projects, we'll continue to do that as well.
Okay.
And the other highlight I think I got from that is as long as someone's willing to, as an investor, keep their money in a project and not try to cash out early, it's still a very, good incentive for them despite the delays we've had on kind of collectively getting the specifics out. It's still a very attractive option for investors. So as long as we continue to hear that, we will continue to try to promote it.
One of the things I'm glad to hear is, and I think you both touched on it, is that this isn't a one organization fits all. It's all about partnering with other organizations, like whether it be a COG, LOC, AOC, the different partners to make it all happen. And I think, because one organization, like I said, whether it be SEDCOR, MEDP, LOC, whoever, can't do it by themselves. So I like the idea of the cooperation between the different organizations, because we all benefit from that. So you have any questions for Eric or Abishah?
Not at the moment. I've had some, but they got answered.
Oh, Mary, you have anything else? Do you have anything else you want to talk about, Abishah?
Not in terms of the quarterly report.
Okay, so the quarterly report, okay, go on then if we're done with the quarterly report.
We're done with the quarterly report, and then we can shift gears to the grants, which, hold on, let me test my IT acumen here.
And I just realized that it was this quarter that I was at a gathering that you convened. Christian isn't here, but Nikaylee and some other people. So I realized that I have had the experience of being in a space while you're doing your work. So I just didn't think it was the same quarter. It's a long quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah, winter's
It
always a
feels like
long
that
quarter.
sometimes.
But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, of course.
Yep.
So now we're going to shift gears and talk about what has been titled the Grow Yamhill County Economic Development Community Grant Program. Can you all see that okay?
We have a bulb
light
that's
doesn't
going
go off?
out.
Yeah.
Oh, this bulb.
Can
is
you
going
get
out.
these out to maybe leave the center one on up here?
They're bad for us anyway.
There we go.
Oh, that's much better, that's much
How's
better.
that?
So again, Carrie Martin helped me to put this information together, and it was, I think she was very smart to embed in here a little bit of history. So we wanted to make sure we're kind of just taking one step back and saying, what is this program about and what was it intended to be about? So the history is that Yamhill County receives revenue from the Oregon Lottery video revenue proceeds, which are allocated to counties annually for the purpose of furthering economic development efforts. I promise I won't read every single one of these slides, but I think it's helpful. Yamhill County's Board of Commissioners have designated a portion of these revenues to fund the Grow Yamhill County Economic Development Community Grant Program. That's currently the title of this program, and as it was
It just
given,
rolls off the
right? It
tongue.
just rolls off.
Yeah, just a really easy one.
I haven't even tried to figure out what the acronym would be,
It's
but
really long.
it's just gonna sound like a garble, I think. So this program, which works to support the private sector in creating jobs and support local municipalities and nonprofits in improving the livability and expanding economic capacity in Yamhill County. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot to think about. How would we do that? But good to have some background. So these are some guiding principles. The Yamhill County Economic Development Community Grant Program supports innovation and sustainable growth through strategic investments and partnerships in economic development initiatives and projects that create or retain jobs, generate increased economic activity, and improve the economic and social livability and vitality of local communities. So here's a little, whenever I've spoken to Eric about this, or I've even kind of wrestled with my own thoughts about what should the program look like, I always go back to, well, what has it been, right? So Carrie provided us with a little bit of historical data, and the community grant awards 15 to 20 small grants annually with an average award range of $500 to $10,000. I'm sorry, with an award range of $500 to $10,000 and an average award of $5,800. So that is the small grants program. As you know, we've historically had two grant programs, the small grants program and the strategic investment fund. So on the strategic investment fund side, 1 to 3 of those grants are awarded annually with an award range of $15,000 to $100,000 and an average award of $50,000. One thing we recognize and we've talked about already is how we capture and retain data about these programs. And so all throughout this, I hope that you're hearing there's this embedded sense that we're developing process. so that we can capture data, so that we have a more robust process for the application, the review, and then of course at the end, the reporting and our ability for us to look back and have our data capture so good that we can do ongoing reporting going forward as well. So
And if just a little history, because, you know, if you haven't seen this, a lot of times this would be done during the budget process with the budget committee, and so a lot of times there was time dedicated to hear the presentations as part of the community requests, or even there was a couple times where we had a binder with all the requests, and the board and the budget committee would go through each one, and, you know, and one of the things coming out of this in our partnership with SEDCOR is the board giving direction that, you know, we need to develop a program for doing this outside of how it's been done in the past. So just to share a little bit more history for those that weren't involved with the process of.
It's good that I got it piecemeal, but it's good to have the.
Right. But it was really tied to the budget process.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Ken. So as we talked about this, and Ken, Carrie, and I met a few times, and Carrie and I met a few additional times, we looked back, we said, what happened before? And then we said, well, what didn't work? You know, what did we like, and then what didn't work? And then we used that as a starting point to build on. So as we asked ourselves, what did we like and what would we like to see going forward, we came up with these three proposals for structure that are at the bottom here. So maintaining our small grants program, maintaining our strategic investment fund grants program, but also adding in a startup grants program. And this really speaks to, again, the work that Eric just shared with you. It's also kind of included here in our annual report. The work that we're doing in the region to create a community, culture of entrepreneurialism. Apparently that's easy for me to say, right? A culture of entrepreneurialism and an environment that supports startups. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail about what that could look like. So these would be our funding priorities and objectives for each of those three proposed grant programs. Starting with the startup grants, and also we give a proposal here in how we would recommend that the funds be allocated to these three programs. So the startup grants, we are recommending a $25,000 per award grant that up to 2 are awarded each year. The objective is to foster a countywide culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, and to support the regional Launch Mid-Valley Initiative in collaboration with the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network. So that's kind of how that functionally gets deployed, but this is Yamhill County's way of showing that investment in entrepreneurism. Someday I'm going to be able to say that.
I think you can say entrepreneurship in place of
Entrepreneurship.
entrepreneurialism.
I don't know that it works, but thank you, I'll try. Entrepreneurship,
Okay.
thank you. The second is one we're already familiar with. That's the small grants program. We're recommending that we retain that grant award of up to $10,000 per award. And the way we'd like to see the allocation work is we would like to see whatever that starting pot of money is for the two $25,000 grant awards to be considered, so that's $50,000. And then of the remaining balance, we'd like to see 1/3 of that go to the small grants program, and 2/3 of it go toward the strategic investment grants. So the small grants program, we're asking that it stay pretty close to the same as it is now, in that one of the objectives is to provide flexible and responsive financial support to businesses and organizations engaged in various stages of development, and that we are promoting countywide accessibility to these funds. So these were two things that I've heard that the commissioners and others say are very important, and the reason why this small grants program was initially developed was so that it would be able to be flexible and responsive, and that there was a desire for it to be regionally very accessible. The strategic investments grant is also very similar to the way that it has been operating historically. We would like to just embed a little bit more firm language about the parameters of the grant program, right? And how much is available and how much per grant award. The objective is to support businesses and organizations making significant investments in the region. And one of the objectives is to prioritize traded sector businesses and job growth potential. Okay? So we'll move forward a little bit here and help you understand how does that play out. So starting from the application review process, we expect this to be a competitive process. The Yamhill County Economic Development Advisory Council, or EDAC, Grants Review Subcommittee will review and score all applications and then make funding recommendations to the Board of Commissioners for final approval. All successful applications and the subsequent contracts are reviewed and approved by the Board of Commissioners. Applicants may be invited to meet with the committee or the Board of Commissioners to discuss their application, and applicants who are denied may reapply in future grant cycles. Of course, the board has final decision-making authority and to accept or decline an award, and all of those are final decisions.
Excuse me, Abisha, I had a question. Did you say that you're in the strategic investment grant pot of money, that only traded sector businesses need apply?
No, thank you for asking for clarity on that. It is, one of our objectives is, the language we're using is to prioritize traded sector, and part of...
Oh, sorry, and it says on job growth potential. So.
Yeah, so prioritizing traded sector businesses and job growth potential. And one of the reasons why we're focusing that energy is because this pot of money, we're looking at it to be intended to focus on those primary jobs. So those primary jobs that we know are kind of foundational and fundamental to developing tax revenue and economic capacity within the county. It is not only, we're not using the language that says only, where you're saying prioritize. And where you'll see that play out, Commissioner Olson, is when we go into the scoring criteria. So we have a few slides forward, you'll see the scoring metric that gives just a little bit more weight to that job creation.
Okay, thank you.
So we talked about the application review. And actually, it might be a good place to stop real quick. Any questions so far? Okay.
No, this makes sense.
Okay, so here's where we get into the evaluation and scoring criteria. So first of all, we're going to make sure that only applications that contain required documentation and are received on time by the deadline will be eligible for review. So again, part of our process is, and this is something, again, we're proposing this, so you can go back and say, does this feel right for us based on what we've historically done and any benefit maybe of that historical process that hasn't been captured here. But my understanding was that there was more of an open timeline for at least the small grants program. And we are proposing that there is an open and closed period for these grant programs. So when we say that the scoring criteria includes the fact that they must have all of their documentation to us by the time that window closes, that's why that's there. So applications will be screened for compliance with the minimum eligibility criteria. Whoever doesn't meet that criteria will not be evaluated through the competitive process. And priority will be given to applicants based on how high they score in the evaluation criteria as outlined in the application. So that's the process of review and the scoring metric we're going to be using. And we'll get to some of that in just a minute. Oh, here you go. And I will also make sure that you get all of this data in front of you. I know Carrie is out today, so we were planning to work collectively on that, but I'll make sure you get a copy of this so that you can spend some time with this and reading through it yourself. But the way we're planning on putting this together is actually very similar to the way that the Marion County EDAB did, in that they created a scoring metric. And if you hit criteria within each area of focus, you could get a higher point or a lower point, and then overall, your total would determine kind of where you placed in terms of priority or likeliness to be recommended. So here we're talking about what are the things we care about. So the first section here, need of the project, is scored at 10 points, and it really talks about just, is the project clearly defined? Do we understand what it is? Will the project impact a large, or we could change that language, a significant number of individuals relative to the size of the community? And will it address an economic development need? The second one is project description. So again, is the project clearly described and defined? Are goals and outcomes outlined? Are the activities clear and complete? And are timelines for activities provided? part of this is we just want to make sure that folks have a plan for these funds and that they understand what they, and are able to communicate what the intended impact of these funds are. Part of this goes back to making sure that they have that skin in the game in terms of developing a plan. The other part is this helps us to create a reporting metric later on to say this is what we care about and this is what we're tracking. The grant fund portion of the project will be started within the funding period, so we want to make sure that that period we've defined is the same target of timeline for theirs, so we're not awarding a grant today that doesn't get spent out for 3 or 4 years. And the project will improve the economic conditions or improve the livability and or safety of the community, and has a clear description on how success will be measured. So Commissioner Starrett, as I'm reading through these, I think you'll hear that there's nothing that locks people into being in traded sector. And if they're not, there's also these requirements to say, how does it affect the community? How does it increase economic capacity? The third section is community support. So we really want to encourage folks to be partnering in the community to make sure they're successful and just garnering additional community support. So we have, project has broad community involvement and strong support within the community. Again, we're not saying it has to, but they're gonna score higher if they do. Project aligns with the community's plan as demonstrated through a letter of support from the city, municipality, or jurisdiction within the project occurs. Do they have community buy-in? Does the city support this initiative? We just see additional kind of wraparound supports come when people are working with each other and communicating. And the community project grant will leverage additional non-grant revenue resources, right? So what are those leveraging funds or resources, and what do they look like? Now we get into the budget component, which was an area that we got a lot of feedback around getting clarity on. So the budget narrative describes income and expenses. Items included correspond with the information. There's details listed in the budget spreadsheet, so this is a tool we'll be providing them, which is a budget spreadsheet. Again, this is a tool that we're taking from the toolbox of the EDAB in Marion County, which I think they did a great job developing over time. Budgeted items are relevant to the project activities, so just kind of making sure what they're spending money on is intended purpose for our grant. The budget and budget narrative clearly identify how the grant funds will be spent, and then other sources of non-grant revenue are secured, or a clear path for securing additional non-grant revenue if needed is outlined. A lot of this is just business plan type of stuff. The next is project sustainability, and there's 10 points awarded for this section. Applicant has identified the necessary resources required for continued operation or maintenance of the project and has a plan to address resource needs. And the project appears sustainable beyond the grant period. I'm going to stop right there real quick because I think this is these two here under project sustainability, 5A and 5B, I think are the ones that have the potential to impact some previously awarded funds or some way that some funds were previously awarded, specifically around event support, so ongoing support of events in various communities. And this is a conversation that we've wrestled with various different ways. And should those funds be coming from this pot, or is there another option for that? Which is, of course, up to you all to decide. But the reason why I pointed out is, as there has been these opportunities for kind of continued support for some of those sorts of programs, we're suggesting that those types of activities may have a significant economic impact in the region. And we would like to support activities that are bringing in tourists and that are having economic impact in the region and are creative and interesting and are spurring economic activity and vitality. And in doing so, we also want to make sure that we don't become somebody's forward-looking budget line item, that there is a plan for sustainability of that program. and that they are looking to identify future resources and maybe sponsorships or other opportunities to do that going into the future. So as you're balancing these recommendations against things that you know have secured funding in the past that you'd like to still get funding, I just wanted to point out those areas where we're creating clarity that didn't used to exist, where there could be some obstacles for those funds.
Right, and it's because it's a scoring metric.
Yeah.
And something, even if it doesn't score well there, may be perfect still.
Absolutely, it could score
You're not-
very
you're
high
not
across the board, but
excluding
not
it.
here.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, any questions before I talk about specifically the startup grants, because that follows a little bit of a different path, but in terms of the scoring metric, are there any questions?
No, it's really nice to see that.
Okay. And we will be putting that into a scoring document for the use of the committee members, and you will have access to all of those scoring results when you receive recommendations. We also talked about the fact that the subcommittee who's reviewing these applications and making recommendations will also be considering other options or other available resources for projects, especially ones that maybe don't get recommended for this particular grant fund. We want to make sure that all of our partners have access to resources to be successful, and if this isn't the right support mechanism, then we want to make sure that we're helping to direct them toward what we think might be. So real quick, I'll talk about the startup grants. So even though they will be reviewed against criteria, right, that I just shared, the startup grants, we're also recommending that they have an additional vetting criteria component through a partnership with Launch Mid-Valley, which is the Startup Program Partnership, and the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, OEN, prior to recommendation to the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners. On the next slide, you'll see a timeline, and the close date on the startup grants is to be determined, and this is why. So since we're kicking off this initiative in the Mid-Willamette Valley to really support our startup businesses, we have partnered with OEN to create a different type of a competitive program just for our startup partners. So they would essentially be subject to that process, then go through the scoring metric, through the grants review committee, and then they would be submitted to you. Eric, did you want to expand on that work at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the interest there is to kind of leverage the startup support with kind of the bigger picture ecosystem development. And for example, if we were looking at reaching out to entrepreneurs for a business plan challenge where businesses come together to start up, and there's some award at the end of it for the ones who win that challenge. That's something that Oregon Entrepreneurs Network and the OTBC and our partners do on a regular basis. Rather than us trying to kind of consistently look for other sources of funds to find for that, it's like, how can we leverage the resources that are here so that if a Yamhill County business is able to compete in that, that gives the county the ability to actually be the one to invest and provide those resources for a startup that wins that here. Marion County is looking at the same type of thing where they would commit some funds to that as well. So I think it's a way to help kind of cycle the funding and allow us kind of collectively to attract other sources of funds to leverage it.
And that Launch Mid-Valley initiative is a true three-county partnership. So each county has players at the table, and I'm representing Yamhill County. We also have Doug Rux from Newburgh, and Jody when she was with MEDP, Small Business Development Centers, at the table. So each county, and then some specific cities. So again, Newburgh and McMinnville, and also the city of Salem. And we're all coming together saying we have skin in the game on this, and we really care about creating a culture that supports startups, and how are we going to do that? So this additional vetting process is not to make it more cumbersome for the startup businesses, it's actually to ensure that they are getting access to all that wraparound support that this initiative and the OEN program already offer. So that they're just kind of, all of those efforts are going to them.
And one thing I'm finding, at least, as we go through this research on with the Venture Catalyst, the kinds of questions people in that business ask are different. So, if someone comes to us with a great idea and we're just like, sign us up. This sounds fantastic. What a great startup idea. It's really helpful to have someone that does this for a living and gets those questions on a regular basis to start to feed us some information on the good questions to ask as follow-up on that, just to separate the good ideas from the implementable good ideas.
Okay, any questions as it pertains to the startup grants process and how it's a little different? So reporting, right? Yes, this matters and we care about this quite a bit. So all entities awarded funding will be required to submit proof of expenditures and clearly defined measurable results that show the effectiveness of the project. The timing and format of reports and invoices will be negotiated at the time of award. So that's an opportunity to identify, any special needs of that group in terms of timing or how they report, sort of a thing. And then all reports are considered public information, of course. And we talked a lot about reporting. How do we make sure we do that right? So the back end is something that we've been asked to bolster. How do we do that right? And I shared with you earlier about our internal processes, including our CRM system. That CRM system will also help support the reporting on this end. One of the things I shared with Carrie is that the way I see the work that SEDCOR should be doing to support this program going forward is that if we grant a business an award today, and by the time their reporting period comes up, we have no idea how that's been going, then we're not doing a very good job of partnering with that business. So that is the work that we do, and it's one of our responsibilities, is to be tracking the progress of our businesses that are in the middle of large projects, right? So we use our CRM database to track projects with our business partners. That's one of the main functions of that, to say where are they at, what's the intention, are they growing by adding equipment, and so they're just adding internal capacity, are they actually expanding physically, are they adding new staff? So once we get to the point where we're doing reporting, of course there will be a portion of that comes by way of narrative and some numbers from the business partner. There also will be some of that to be complemented through our own database to say, here's what we saw happen and here's what's going on. Does that make sense? So we're developing this more robust reporting requirements and process. So eligible applicants, small businesses in good standing, nonprofits having a 501c3 and nonprofits having a 501c6 status with the IRS, also in good standing. Educational institutions and local governments, those are cities or townships and special districts. So this gets to that, can we still maintain flexibility for funds of our small grants program to provide wayfinding projects? There's still all that flexibility in there. Okay. And as you keep those concerns in mind and read through the criteria, if you found that you think we've missed something, please let us know, and there's an opportunity to make some adjustments. Eligible project activities, acquisition, capacity building, construction, new build renovation, equipment purchases, market research, so that could be significant market research that helps take a business to a new level, technical assistance, and workforce training programs. One of the stories I was told was about how a local business needed support and wrote for a grant to get some of their workforce trained in a specific program that would make them eligible for a federal contract. And those funds were utilized that way, and their staff was trained, and they secured that federal contract. And that there was a desire to still see an opportunity for funds to be used that way. So I think this is where that would play out.
And when I see market research on that list, I mean, just as an example, we just had a meeting with the Small Business Development Center. They have a market research resource. So this, our process here allows us to be able to kind of a quick look at this and say, call the SBDC and say, hey, we have somebody that's looking for $5,000 to do this. Is this something you can do for them and allow us to have that $5,000 to address somebody else's needs? So I think that's you know, one of the things we need to look at. We talk about documenting the need, but that's some of our due diligence in this as well. So.
Are there any questions about any of those at this point? So ineligible expenses, just as important to outline, right? So debt retirement, events that do not have a direct economic benefit, funding for political or religious activities, indirect or overhead costs, individuals or organizations that unfairly discriminate, pass-through funding to other individuals or organizations, professional services such as accounting, tax, and legal services, and support for ongoing programs. So what are the next steps then? How do we move this forward, right? That's kind of what we're all here to say, now what? So recommendations for the EDAC Grants Review Subcommittee. We have put together that list, and I put forward a request to hold a spot to kind of review that with a partial list. I have a full list to show you at the end of the slide presentation. The Yamhill County Board of Commissioners are asked to approve the Grants Review Committee members, and then Yamhill County Board of Commissioners will establish the grant program allocation. That goes back to the way that the funds are actually allocated. So long as you agree with our recommendation to include a new grant program and agree with our recommendation for allocation, that would be the next step. And then lastly, to the adoption of the proposed economic development community grant program, the way that we've outlined it. So some of those differences really to highlight, right, are the addition of the startup grant program, the way that we have structured the scoring metric, some of the criteria that we have set that creates a little bit more constraint on the types of projects that get funded. And then ongoing, our timeline, which as Ken shared earlier, better aligns with the budgeting process for the county. So speaking of which, application process and timeline. So we would like to see all 3 of the grant programs open on May 1st and close on June 30th. Then the applications would be reviewed by the EDAC subcommittee sometime between the time of July 2nd and July 18th. Grants project recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, that July 23rd to 25th time period. Award notifications go out at the end of July, beginning of August. And then fund disbursements would happen early September, September 2nd. Final report would be due a year later at the end of September, September 30th of 2020. So this would be just for this next year. Questions?
Looks like a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start. So another thing I wanted to share in here, and what I'm building into the timeline of the EDAC, the council, the full council, is that at the end of this process, coming into the end of the calendar year, so about December timeline, after we receive the final reports back and we're looking and understanding what's happened, how did this play out, how did it work, do we feel good about it, is for the EDAC to review that total process and to make any recommendations for change for the fall, for the next year so we would be reviewing that in December and making recommendations by February. So in case we said, you know, as we actually got into this and we reviewed it, we feel like we've learned something and we'd like to recommend a change, you would have that prior to reopening the next round. And then I also now have the list, the full list of recommended members for the Grants Review Subcommittee. And again, this is a list of participants of the EDAC who have self-selected and been supported by the full team to be our first year Grants Review Subcommittee. We stuck to our process as we had defined it early on to say that we would like it to be majority industry partners and to represent the entire county, and also to have input from the individual cities. So we have 3 city representatives and 4 industry member partners, and that representation is countywide. Any questions? And I believe that is the end.
So it's,
That's a good list.
I think very, very good, Abishai. I think one of the first things that we need to, we understand we need to look at doing is actually approving the formation of this grant sub-review committee and appointing these people to the grant sub-review committee. Ken?
Yeah, do you mind, could you go back a slide? Maybe one more. So for this one, for the next steps, you know, because the
Right.
I think it could be either or. It could be the adoption of the actual, you know, the grant program, basically endorsing that, and then as part of that, also, you know, approving the subcommittee. You know, I think those are
Both of them can be done this together.
right. You know, and then also just, you know, there's some other components to this that, you know, that we'll be doing during the budget process, you know, with this new format. Right now, we don't have Fund 26, which is the Economic Development Fund within the budget set up, you know, so what we'd be looking at doing is over the, you know, the budget process that's coming up is looking at, you know, if the board is agreeable with the program that, you know, on what this is going to look like, and then appointing that committee, the other is going to be a set in the amount of funds that are available, that, you know, for the program for that next year. So, so part of me, I could see 1 and 4, whether it's, or 1 and, I'm sorry, 2 and 4. You know, maybe at the same time, that approving the concept of the program going, you know, as it's been laid out, and then appointing this committee.
Well, I'll tell you, I think the what we're going about is definitely the right way to do it, because I stated 2 years ago that I don't think the Board of Commissioners are or should be the economic development experts. You know, once that's the reason for, before you say for sign a contract with like SEDCOR, because they're the economic development specialists. We shouldn't be involved in making the final decisions and approving, but we shouldn't be determined who gets what, because two things have always been a concern of mine is, you know, without a program like this is I don't like to call it favoritism or subjectivity of somebody getting a grant or not, and a lot of this removes that from it. I think the other thing is, though, that I'm still not quite sure, and I know you covered it, Abishai, was if we should take as a commission, we have those organizations that come to us every year and ask us for grants for one thing, like the fireworks. Definitely they have a big impact economically as a one-time event, but then they start, you know, like you said, Abishai, they start every year wanting that going future. Or do we take some of money, not counting these programs, and as a commission, do we say, you know, we do have these other things we may want to sponsor, maybe not a lot of money, but do we set that money aside from this program?
Yeah, because this really wasn't intended to replace the community requests that we get on the first day of for the hearing on Budget Committee. And knowing that we have different sources of funds that may be available for that, right. I think what we were looking at doing, and I think it'll be further discussion once we get into the budget, is carving out the funding to support this grant program and those 3 levels, and then just like you were saying, there's a small portion that we hold for those community types of events, or
and that's why I bring that forward, because I'd hate as we go through the budget and you guys start the budget of getting a request to fund something, we say a community request, and we say, well, that really belongs inside of the grant problem. It really doesn't belong as a community support activity here. It really, you need to do a grant because this really falls within the grant program, and to be able to make sure we're at time as we start getting those public requests, you know, community requests, that we can make, or you can make a determination, or somebody, that these don't really fall under that category, they really fall under this grant program.
Do we need a scoring criteria then?
Well, it's funny because the timing of it, You know, because like they were saying how the looking at the grant program opening on May 1st, which is funny because that's the last day of deliberations for this year's budget committee. You know, so for some of those that maybe if we're hearing community requests during the budget process, that it'd be like, this grant program, this would redirect at that point,
Okay.
you know,
And I'm fine
to
with,
that.
I'm fine with that, so.
Yeah.
And it aligns well with what, kind of how we envision the intention of these
Yeah.
funds, is to spur economic activity. So some of those sorts of events, like you said, Chair Olson, might be appropriate to refer to this funding
Yeah.
source, but others might be more appropriate to refer to an ongoing kind of community support fund.
I do definitely like the addition of the startup category to that, because I think, you know, yeah, they may take more tracking, they may take more reporting, but I think that's the entrepreneurship, that's where I think that's a big thing. So I think that's pretty good, once everything's developed, I think it's a good, very good program.
Thank you. Thank you.
So then
Thank
what
you,
we'll do is,
Abisha.
as far as the next step is, we'll work on finalizing the program packet and then the list that we'll bring forward, you know, here in the next week or so. We didn't put on the agenda for this week, but, you know, we didn't put it on for this Thursday. We'll just, you know, in the next couple of weeks to bring it before the board for consideration.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Abisha, thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much. Thank you
Eric,
for coming
thank you,
here.
thank you for coming
Yeah.
over today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.
We know you're all moved now, so you have all sorts of time to spare, right?
Keep telling people that I still haven't closed on the house, so I'm I'm officially a squatter, so it's
Oh, well.
a legal squatter.
Yes.
Code enforcement.
Any-
Cameras out here.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well,
All
thank
right,
you, you two.
nice job.
Thanks very
Good-
much.
Good job, Abisha.
Tell Carrie I did a good job because.
Yes.
We will tell her.
Oh, she'll know.
Yeah.
She was a
And we're
very
we're excited
great
about
resource.
this. I think this is a really.
We're trying to
good
think it's a great program.
Thank you.
for
It's
us.
wonderful to have a process for this. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to think the follow-up too, so you know,
Yeah.
we know that they spent their money in the right way.
Yeah.
and the
That's
jobs
right.
were there, so we can keep track.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, Commissioners, I'll take us on to our informal session. The first thing under the informal session is we have department updates, which we don't have any scheduled for today. We have our Thursday formal session review and the consent agenda review and the non-consent agenda review. So attached to your agenda for today was Thursday's agenda, and we'll just go through that. Under other business, we have the consideration of an employment contract between Yamhill County Planning Department and Cather Plant for electrical building inspection services at the rate of $35 an hour, retroactive to March 4th and going through July 1 of 2020, automatic renewal. Would we like to move that to consent agenda?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we'll move item D1 to the consent agenda. Item D2, consideration of approval of amendment to the agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Jeff and Leona Reed, which was Board Order 17-145, effective April 1st, 2019, at a rate not to exceed $225 per month, and that was per bedroom for the community support services clients. So,
It's
consent agenda?
525?
525.
Yes.
Oh, 525 is correct.
I think we should keep that, or move that to the consent.
Yes.
Okay, we'll move
please.
that
Thank you.
D2 to the consent agenda. D3, consideration approval of Public Works 2019 Maintenance Improvement Project Road List, the alternates base cost amount of $1,385,885.
1
Or
million.
1 million.
What did I say?
1,385,885.
I think you said 100,000.
Wow. Well, that's all I want to spend is
Yeah.
100,000. I don't want to spend any more. So 1,385,885. Being the Public Works liaison, Casey, do you want that put to the consent or
Yeah, I would
left
love
on?
to, and mostly it's because of the highlighting of scoring with recommendations, and so I thought if we could, I know that there was some offer from Ken that we could bring in the folks who are making the recommendations.
So you don't want it on, you like to keep it on?
I would like to keep it on other business so that we can hear.
Okay,
have
let,
a sense of the scoring.
Let D.
So
finish.
hearing that, so that means you do want, you know, for me to make arrangements for Public Works staff to be available to answer questions
Yes,
that come up
please.
on this? Okay.
So we will not be adding item D3 to the consent agenda then.
Okay, thank you.
D4, consideration approval of the reappointment of Tim Durfelt, Marie Visca, and Bill Pilato to to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, each to a 4-year term to expire March 28th, 2023. As liaison to the Parks Board, and we've stated how we want to fill positions, but I think people that serve in a position should always be offered the first to reaffirm whether they want that position or not, to extend it. So I'd make a recommendation that we move that to the consent agenda. Do I have any? None? Then, Mary, you have any comments?
No, can you
Okay.
just clarify, Mr. Chair? If somebody is serving on a board, you're
Currently.
currently asking if they are interested in continuing on or being considered.
That they should ask to be continued on to whatever their term limits are, so. Because you're right, considered or reappointed are two
Or
different
they
things.
just, so which are you suggesting?
I'm actually saying reappointed. is
Just
what I'm talking-
reappointed?
Right.
If that's their desire?
If that's their desire.
Got it.
Okay, Casey, you okay with that?
Yes.
So then, that
Thank you
being
for
said,
clarifying.
let's move item D4 to the consent agenda. We do have one public hearing, and that's in GO 118, and Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about that one? Well, two. You want to talk about that first one?
No.
Okay, you're the applicant, we're not going to talk about that. We have a second public hearing, which is an appeal of the planning director's approval. So we do have two of a conditional use and site design review for construction of a winery, tasting room, accessory uses. And we do have materials that. So we do have two public hearings scheduled for Thursday.
And before we move on, because we did have, from Russell Mark, there was a resolution, and I said
I was just going to.
I was going to circle back and
Yes.
say, okay with adding that to new business?
I'd add, yeah, the original presentation
other
for,
business.
Other business? Yeah.
right, for the child abuse prevention presentation, I'd move that to other business.
Okay. So we'll get that added, and we'll also get the draft resolution added to the packet
Okay.
as well, so it's available for view.
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. So that will take us then down to announcements. Any announcements? Casey? Or do you want to save them for your announcements for Thursday?
Actually,
Do you have any?
There is a discussion item, but,
we're back to this one, back to the other agenda.
yeah. That's why I wasn't ready, because
I'm sorry, I was looking at these multi-agendas. My fault, I was looking at the
The
wrong
other
one.
one's just a
I'm
draft.
still learning the different.
Okay, we have a discussion, there's a budget committee application process, so let's go back there. So what discussion we want to have, let's just start our discussion. Casey? Do we have, how many applicants now, Ken? 7?
Correct.
So how do we want to interview the 7? Do we want to read them over and make a recommendation and only interview the top 3? What's the thinking around the commission?
I think that the second idea is the one I would go with, which is get a smaller number, since we do have a large number, and then find the time to interview.
Okay, so how are we going to come up with that?
That's a good question.
Do we each score them individually and see who the 3 are going to be? I mean, how do we come up with that top 3 or 4 number? Or do we just interview them all?
I don't know, I have 3 in my head, but.
The difficult with, and the reason I'm quiet, because it's not like something that I can give you a scoring criteria for
Right.
something like this. This is for a lay citizen budget committee member. So as far as qualifications, who should be on there, that's some of the difficulties, and that's why staff can't really give a recommendation, on how to narrow the field. So ultimately, I believe it's up to the 3 of you on how you want to proceed, or if.
So Mary, you always have good ideas.
Well, I think this process has really been protracted, unnecessarily so. That's just my opinion. I think in the past, we've done these without it becoming a long, drawn-out, and I feel it's become very politicized. So I'm going to defer to, this was something that you have chosen to do, so obviously I can count, and I'm going to, suggest that you however you want to do it. I do know that Monday we start our budget presentations, and typically we've had somebody front and center ready to go. So I think it's really late in the game to be playing this game, and so I'm a little concerned about how this is played out. I guess based on where we are, is to just say, who do we each want to throw in 3 people we should.
And see where they all cook.
But then again, going back to the whole interview process, if you look at an application, which is typically what we do, we look at the application and you can pretty much tell, is this somebody we'd like to consider? I don't know about the exercise of sitting somebody down and saying, why do you want to do it?
Yeah,
Well, because I care about my community and because I want to, and blah, blah, blah.
No, I'll agree with you, Mary. If we have that many applications, by perusing and reviewing the applications ourselves, we all should basically know, like, here's one that just doesn't, nothing would fit right in. Here's one that would fit in fairly well, and here's one that would fit in real well. And just bring those name forward. We may come out of that a conclusion of 3 people out of all the applicants that we may agree on that deal. And I'm not necessarily for the interview process either. I think we should be able to get that from the applications themselves. Then it just comes down to, we vote on the 3, or whatever.
So, and do we even want to, or do we want to just sit here as a board and look at each application and say, this is why, I don't think this is advisable at this time, and then move on to the next one, and then whittle it down that way, or do we want to come with our 3 recommendations?
Tell you the truth, I would rather sit down like you just said as a board between the 3 of us and whittle them down that way. And if we all feel there's some that's not really a strong candidate, and if we feel there's somebody that's a real strong candidate, we move them in. And I think we'd get more out of, instead of each coming up with 3 individual voices, if the 3 of us just sat down and whittled it down till we think we have the best candidate there is.
And we're out of time because we don't have an informal next Tuesday because we're in budgets.
Informal next Tuesday.
And informal. Where are we time-wise? I'm in Salem. We're kind of out of time, so I don't know where we go.
Ken, we're Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, right?
Correct.
And that's the first presentations by the
Correct.
committees. So Thursday, let's see, we don't have a budget committee meeting or any budget stuff scheduled Thursday. do
We have a combined session.
I'd say we make the decision Thursday,
A week from Thursday?
a week from today, a week from tomorrow, right?
A week from Thursday.
Right, a week from Thursday.
we-
They would miss the first set of the original presentations to the commission, but then after that, they would be, whoever we had appoint Thursday would be, next Thursday would be going on, moving forward to all the rest of them.
So that would be a week from Thursday, we just talk about the applications. We just go through our stack of applications and talk about them as a board on Thursday at formal.
Yeah, that's.
A formal, informal
I'm fine with that.
Does that work?
That works for me. I've read through them, I've thought about them.
I think, and that's why I'd rather do it, you said, Mary, and actually, because I know you've read through them, I've read through them, Casey read through them. I think we can come with a pretty good, and just the 3 of us, and
Yeah,
come up with the
I've
best,
got
that
3
we
that
think
I
is the
think
best
are-
applicant.
Okay,
That I would offer,
sure.
Yeah, so,
that are both Chris's recommendations and
Yeah,
people
so-
I know who've
okay.
applied. And
So Ken, why don't we put that on next Thursday, not tomorrow's, but next Thursday, discussion and appointment of a budget committee member
For Thursday.
for Thursday.
Got it.
Because you could do 2 parts, because it is a combined,
Yeah.
you could also appoint at that time.
Or we could
as
just
well.
not do it at the.
Oh, and do it at informal and
We,
then appoint.
we could do it at a
Yeah,
formal
and
and
then-
appoint it informal,
Well, I'm saying it's a
or
combined.
not do it informal and just do
No,
it during.
it's a combined session.
It's one, so it doesn't make
So
any
it's
difference.
one, so
We'll
you
just go
can,
straight through.
you can deliberate,
Right.
discuss, and then make a
And make a
motion,
decision.
and then you can take the vote right at that time.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm all for doing that, so next Thursday,
Okay?
not
And then
tomorrow,
they
next
can
Thursday.
also, this newly appointed person can watch, because I bet that it'll be filmed. No, it won't be filmed, budget committee, and service teams.
You
No,
tell
but
speak for
any
our
of
filmer.
any of the applicants could also come
Come to
and observe.
Because they can come and observe.
They can, any
Yes,
of the,
Right, they can attend.
um, you
And
know.
Ken, you might want to notify those, like you did,
It's
you
not
know, the
picked
one
up
lady
loud.
day that says, you know, we're gonna have this next Thursday, but Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are the presentations, and you're all
Mhm.
welcome to come and watch the presentations.
Well, because it's open to the public.
Yeah,
You know, I just clarified that with the presentations that are next week, it's not the full presentation.
no, but
It's just a
somebody might show us
presentation
their
at the
interest if they
end.
want
Right.
to come and watch those anyway.
So
Yeah.
I always put that disclaimer because this is just the finalizing the initial budget
Yeah.
that will be taken to the full budget committee for
Yeah.
the full presentation at the end of the
Okay.
month, next month.
So I think that's the consensus, that's what we'll
Yeah,
go
that
ahead,
sounds
we'll
great.
move forward
Okay.
doing it
Thank
that
you.
way.
Yeah.
And I do
And
want
it's
to,
great, or I wanted to say it's really wonderful having so many people's applications to review and
Yeah.
thinking about how they might fit into the rest of the budget committee.
and I do want to thank Ken, I know, because he's been working hard at looking at, after this is over, how we do this for future, how we do it for, develop a little bit better process for future appointments to the commission, so we don't get this fun where everything, where it is in a hurry, like, and I agree
Yeah.
with you, Commissioner Starrett. This one was a hurry, kind of a hurried long, and I don't think we should have to do that. So Ken is going to be working on that, so.
I will say it's not a simple process, you know, because,
No.
I mean, it's really hard, I mean, for something like this, you know, unlike, and I keep going back to, unlike recruiting for hiring for a position to where you have basic qualifications and standards that are, you know, and when you have something that's open like this, that
Yeah, and
it's
I'm-
really hard to quantify or,
Yeah, my only thing is I don't care that much about qualification standards as I care about giving people an adequate amount of time to applying for something. We can look at their qualifications and their standards and decide if they're a good pick. I just want to make sure we give everybody adequate time
Mhm.
to apply for something that comes open. So.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that being said, now we will, we don't have any discussions on today's, that's all for Thursday, so anything else, Mary, you want to bring up?
Just, I'll be testifying tomorrow on my DHS child welfare bill, which is to give more local
Go,
control.
Go, Mary, go.
I will say that DHS is pushing back.
Oh, are you surprised?
It's already started to be watered down. We expected this, but just, you know, Russell Mark from Juliet's House has signed on as to support this bill. And so Seamus McCarthy, our CEO of our CCO, is going to be testifying with me. And interestingly enough, Representative Noble is going to leave his position on the Housing and Human Services Committee, come and sit down and talk about a situation that happened to him, which shouldn't happen to anybody, and much less a state representative. So more of an indication why we do need a change in child welfare. The other thing is, we had Barry Lilly came and asked us, he had concerns about the toothpaste
Right.
and soap, so I reached out to the sheriff's office, and basically the bottom line is that we do charge for those basic items, toothpaste, soap, things like that, but that does come out of general fund,
General fund.
and basically we're at now outstanding charges to inmate accounts, $2,108,633. But they do, if nobody has refused soap or toothpaste or anything, they're given it. It's $3 a pack for these little items. And if they can't, it just goes on their
Balance.
charge. And then if they leave and they don't have any money, then there you go. But everybody's given soap, toothpaste, shampoo,
So it's not like they don't
toothpaste.
get, it's not like they don't
They're
get
getting it, right. So just, I have an accounting, and they're given they're given a comb and a cup and writing paper and toothpaste and shampoo, and every week they're given, asked if they want additional soap and that. So that's how it works. It does come out of general fund, and there's that, so.
Yeah,
Wow.
I started reading and I was like, oh, wow, oh, wow.
Yeah, and also there are many programs within the jail for drug and alcohol, religious services,
Yeah.
any kind of chemical dependency, and job training. So there's a lot going on for our inmates. They do have a huge amount of support while they're incarcerated.
So thank you for clarifying all that, because knowing that it's not, even though they get charged for it, but it's really, if they don't pay for it, it goes to the general, so.
Right. So
It's
that's
not like we're turning them away from any of the hygiene
from
stuff they
toothpaste.
need.
No, you
That's
can't have any
right.
toothpaste until you pay up.
That's right.
Anyway, that's all I have.
Okay,
Thank
Casey,
you.
you have anything till Thursday?
Yeah, no, not until Thursday. How about that?
Okay,
I've got all
I,
these budget committee meetings next week, but
But yeah, that was budget. They're important meetings. I went over yesterday to a hearing on transportation and economic development, basically how it will apply to the cap and trade.
Cavalcade.
It's going to be another interesting one to get through the legislature.
Yep.
I don't have the faintest clue where that's going to go. And I don't think any of the legislatures have a faintest clue where that's going to go. So it was interesting to sit down. But other than that, I don't have anything else. So if we don't have anything else, Ken, you have anything?
I do not.
Mr. Sadlow? Okay. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I gotta go to Whitecap.
Yeah.